Welcome to the podcast summary of Geert Wilders. Today's story is Geert Wilders and why he's been such a disruptive force in Dutch politics for so long. It's about more than one politician saying inflammatory things. It's about how anti-Islam politics, free speech fights, anti-EU nationalism, and coalition dealmaking all ended up feeding the rise of the PVV. And it's also about the strange shape of power in the Netherlands, where Wilders won big, entered government influence, and still didn't become prime minister. At the center of Wilders' project is a very blunt claim. He doesn't treat Islam mainly as a religion, but as a political ideology he compares to communism and fascism. From that view, he argues the Quran contains passages that clash with Dutch law and a liberal society, and that's what drives some of his most extreme proposals. Those proposals have included banning the Quran, blocking new mosques, stopping immigration from Muslim-majority countries, taxing hijabs, and even paying settled immigrants to leave the Netherlands. What's striking is how much harder his line became over time. After September 11, he still said Islam itself was respectable, and the problem was a small extremist minority. Later, he moved to the much more absolute line. I don't hate Muslims, I hate Islam. Wilders sells this as a defense of ordinary Dutch people, often through the made-up couple Henk and Ingrid, his stand-ins for working families who feel ignored by mainstream politics. He presents coalition politics as an elite machine that produces endless compromise, blurry responsibility, and very little accountability. In its place, he offers something sharper and emotionally cleaner: borders, national identity, and the promise that the public should be able to recognize who's actually in charge. Part of the appeal is that this message isn't only culturally conservative. He also wraps himself in selected liberal causes like women's equality, LGBT rights, personal autonomy, and even mandatory LGBT education, using them as proof that Dutch freedoms need defending from conservative Islam. It's a very specific kind of populism: nationalist, anti-establishment, and happy to borrow liberal language when it helps draw the contrast he wants. Wilders has also spent years turning offensive speech into a test case for liberal democracy. His argument is that political expression, even when it's ugly or insulting, should usually stay protected unless it directly incites violence. The biggest example was his 2008 film Fitna, which paired Quranic passages with images of terrorism. That brought international condemnation, legal threats from Jordan, and even a murder call from Al-Qaeda. Britain barred him from entering the country at first. Then a tribunal overturned the ban. Dutch courts kept circling the same basic question: where does political speech end and unlawful discrimination begin? He was acquitted in 2011, convicted in 2016 over remarks about Moroccans, and then saw that conviction overturned in 2020. So even if you think his politics are toxic, his career has forced a very real argument about whether democracies can defend open debate without carving out political speech they find dangerous or disgusting. The PVV started small. In 2006, it won 9 out of 150 seats. By 2010, it was up to 24 seats and 15.5% of the vote, which made Wilders a central player in a fragmented parliament where nobody really gets to govern alone. That's been one of the enduring Dutch paradoxes around him. Major parties kept saying they wouldn't govern with Wilders, but they still had to govern in a system where his support could matter a lot. Then came the 2023 election, when the PVV became the largest party. A big reason was that Wilders moderated his tone just enough and signaled that some of his most incompatible positions could be put aside, at least for coalition talks. In the end, he withdrew his bid to become prime minister, calling it a sacrifice and saying it felt constitutionally wrong, but the practical outcome was clear enough. The PVV entered coalition government and gained influence over migration policy without Wilders himself taking the top job. In politics, sometimes power arrives wearing a compromise badge. A lot of this connects to a broader sovereignty argument. Wilders has pushed for Dutch withdrawal from the European Union for years, including a Nexit referendum, And he's described the EU as a monster in Brussels controlling borders, money, the economy, and currency. Back in 2012, he even withdrew support from the Rutte cabinet over European deficit rules, blaming European dictates for austerity and helping trigger new elections. After the PVV's 2023 victory, though, he suspended the immediate Nexit demand to keep coalition talks alive. The newer version was less about leaving tomorrow and more about weakening EU power from within. That shift fits the pattern we've seen elsewhere with Wilders. The instinct stays the same, but the packaging gets adjusted when actual governing influence is on the table. On foreign policy, Wilders has some unusually strong identifications and some very awkward contradictions. With Israel, the identification is deep and explicit. He calls it the West's first line of defense and treats the struggle over Jerusalem as part of a broader civilizational fight between liberal Western society and Islam. He has backed expanded settlements and annexation of the West Bank, argued Jordan should be renamed Palestine, and in 2024 visited a West Bank settlement while meeting Israeli leaders despite an active ICC arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu. That kind of rhetoric and symbolism has carried diplomatic costs for the Netherlands, with officials warning that the settlement visit clashed with the coalition agreement and others arguing that his overseas statements have hurt Dutch interests before. Then there's Russia, where the record is much less tidy than Wilders' anti-authoritarian language might suggest. He once called Vladimir Putin a true patriot and an ally against Islamic terrorism, visited Moscow in 2018, and criticized what he saw as Dutch Russophobia. After Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, he did condemn the aggression, but he opposed major military aid and sanctions, saying Dutch money and weapons should stay in the Netherlands and linking sanctions to inflation and the energy crisis. Leaked documents in 2023 that purported to show Kremlin efforts to cultivate PVV connections only added to the scrutiny. So on both Israel and Russia, you see the same underlying habit. Wilders reads foreign policy through identity, civilizational conflict, and national self-interest, even when that creates friction with Dutch diplomacy. One more thing that really matters in understanding Wilders is security. Since 2004, he's lived under continuous armed protection because of repeated death threats, including plots linked to the Hofstad network, appearances on al-Qaeda death lists, and threats tied to his support for controversial remarks about Muhammad. His life has included a bulletproof safe house, armored transport, a panic room, permanent plainclothes, police protection, and heavy visitor screening. He said those restrictions cost him any normal personal life, which is the kind of sentence that lands a little differently when you stop and picture it. And the threat hasn't just been abstract. A journalist working undercover as a PVV intern found dozens of chances to get close to him, and security officials twice managed to smuggle a firearm into his parliamentary offices. That doesn't excuse his politics, but it does explain some of the siege mentality around him and around the movement he leads. Wilders' career sits right where a lot of modern politics gets most uncomfortable. Religion, identity, speech, borders, democracy, and the question of who a country thinks it belongs to. He didn't need to become prime minister to move the Dutch political center of gravity. He just had to keep making himself impossible to ignore. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.